We are here to update and inform the state of Vermont on two civil actions that the state of Vermont filed against Ariel Quiros and Bill Stenger over 2 years ago. About 20 minutes ago, my office filed paperwork with the Washington County Superior Court outlining the terms of settlement with Ariel Quiros, as well as we've entered into a settlement with Bill Stenger. I believe these settlements satisfies the principles of accountability, transparency, repairing the harm done to the city of Newport and the Northeast Kingdom, and restoring the public trust that this scandal has done to our state. In terms of the settlement with Ariel Quiros, the outline is this. Mr. Quiros will no longer do business in the state of Vermont. He can't sell or trade securities in Vermont, nor can he work with a firm that does so. Mr. Quiros will pay the state $2 million, satisfied by 5 properties that he owns in the Northeast Kingdom. Those properties will be transferred to the state of Vermont, they will be liquidated, and those monies will be earmarked for economic development in the Northeast Kingdom. In regards to Mr. Stenger, Mr. Stenger, at his own direction, will pay $100,000 to the city of Newport, administered by the Agency of Commerce, and that money is earmarked for economic development for the city of Newport. He will make that payment of $100,000 over the course of 4 years with an initial payment of $20,000. This is all subject to court approval, but once the court approves this agreement, particularly with Mr. Quiros, the state of Vermont, will dismiss the cases against both Ariel Quiros and Mr. Stenger. And let me tell you why. The greatest harm that this scandal has inflicted on our state is the loss of public trust in state government. Specifically, the question of what did state government do or didn't do in terms of the management of EB5. And that question of what state government did or didn't do will not be answered through litigation, because litigation means lawyers, and lawyers fight. And it's an adversarial process. We'll fight over documents, we'll claim privileges and confidentiality, we'll fight over the admissibility of evidence. Vermonters deserve better. By dismissing the case, it allows me to turn over documents to an independent third party, in this case Auditor Doug Hoffer, who will conduct an audit and answer that question of what happened within state government in terms of the management of EB5. Auditor Hoffer, I want to thank you for your willingness to undertake this. I also want to say this, that we control these 2 cases. There's a lot of litigation about EB5. We control these cases against Quiros and Stenger. We're dismissing them. We're repairing the harm done to the city of Newport. We're taking a small step towards that direction to the Northeast Kingdom, and I believe going on the path of transparency to answer that question by taking this out of the legal system. The AG's office would turn these documents over to the public tomorrow if we could. There was another case out of Lamoille County Superior Court. We won. The plaintiff, as his right, appealed the case to the Supreme Court. That case is currently pending. We will continue to defend the state of Vermont. We have a fiduciary duty to our clients. We will do our job. But once that case is over and we feel confident about our case and the strength of our case, those documents will be turned over to the public. And I want to say this, why we're in Newport. This is a great city. It's a vibrant city. It's undergoing a process of revitalization. We hope that by closing this chapter today, by getting some money to this great city, that it will continue its work towards a brighter future, to revitalizing this city, to revitalizing the kingdom, and restoring the harm done to so many community members, and restoring the public trust in our state government. So with that, let me turn it over to Governor Scott.
Well, thank you, TJ, and good afternoon, and thanks for everyone for being here. As the Attorney General mentioned, a little over 2 years ago, the State of Vermont and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed fraud and consumer protection actions against Ariel Quiros and Bill Stenger. The settlement we're here to announce today sends a message, and it ends the state's civil case against Mr. Quiros and Mr. Stenger, and allows us to move forward with a considerable amount of money for the Northeast Kingdom and impacted communities. I want to thank the Attorney General and his team for all their hard work to make this possible. With over $2 million the state will receive in this settlement, which again comes through the Ariel Quiros remaining Vermont properties and payments from Bill Stenger over the next 5 years, we will be able to help the Northeast Kingdom and the Newport region in particular with much needed funding for economic development. The $100,000 settlement with Bill Stenger is earmarked specifically for the city of Newport for economic development initiatives. In my State of the State address back in January, I talked about the need to invest more in Vermont's downtowns and our county economic centers across the state, and particularly in the rural areas of Vermont outside of Chittenden County. And while I know more is needed, we're confident this settlement will make a meaningful impact for the kingdom. With the changing economic and demographic dynamics in most parts of Vermont, an infusion of capital is very helpful to this region and this economy. The Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and Deputy Secretary Ted Brady is here today, will work with regional development commissions, local businesses, nonprofits, and local leaders like Mayor Monette, who you'll hear from shortly, and others to determine how to best use the settlement money as the state works to liquidate these properties. Today's announcement represents a major step forward for the entire state as we continue to recover from the actions of the J. defendants. I want to recognize the tremendous efforts of the hardworking contractors who built the EB5 projects across the region and who stuck with us until they were able to be paid in full for their work. I also want to thank the hundreds of employees at J. and Burke who similarly hung with us even on the darkest days of the fraud and now have secure employment at much improved resorts. I want Michael Goldberg to know how much we appreciate his great work and commitment to the Northeast Kingdom and look forward to my administration's continued relationship with him. I also want to acknowledge the Department of Financial Regulation in both the previous administration and my administration for the good work done to uncover the fraud, manage the civil enforcement action, and many other related issues that have arisen over the past few years. And last but not least, I want to again thank the Attorney General and his team for all their legal work and for negotiating this settlement we announced today. While our work is not yet completed, the dark cloud that has been hanging over us for the last few years is beginning to lift, and I'm confident better days are ahead for this region. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the Auditor of Accounts, Doug Hoffer.
Thank you. Just a couple of words. I'll echo the Governor's comments. It's wonderful that the Attorney General's office has settled this case. It's even better that they recovered some funds that can be put to good work here for community and economic development. And further, the release of the materials, the voluminous materials, to my office will allow us, as TJ said, to address and answer the outstanding question that Vermonters are curious about and have a right to know. How did we get here? And furthermore, what lessons can we take away from it? So I look forward to the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor Hoffer. I just want to follow up on one thing the Governor said, that this case was started over 2 years ago. And the State of Vermont, as I said, filed a civil action. At that time, the State of Vermont consulted with federal authorities. Federal authorities are conducting, there's an ongoing criminal investigation. The state brought a civil action. When you talk about a civil action, you're talking about money. And I want to make that very clear as we talk about what were the possible options with this. I also want to say this, that as every lawyer knows, we could litigate this and continue to litigate it. And I'm going to tell you where we'd likely end up. We'd be here in 5 years in the same ballpark. Let's move forward. Let's restore the harm done. Let's restore the trust in Vermont. Let's give Newport and the Kingdom a chance. With that, let me turn it over to Mayor Monette. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years since this scandal broke, and I can remember watching the announcement on TV with the city manager, who'd only been on the job for 8 months, and she looked at me like, what have I got myself into? But with that said, we didn't just curl up and hide. We decided to roll up our sleeves and get right to work. We immediately started working with people from the state of Vermont, folks from NCIC and NVDA, our economic development partners, to start planning for a future of Newport without EB5, because everyone in the community had put all their ducks as EB5 was going to save the city. Well, we now know what happened. We now know that 2 years later we have a vacant lot on Main Street, and what I look at is today's process is a step in the healing process. It really does start to bring closure. We will have financial money for economic development. It'll allow us to move forward with trying to market Main Street, that project, and move forward with other projects in the community. We lost my train of thought. Okay, we basically have had several studies done through grants from the Agency of Community Economic Development, a waterfront study grant, a Main Street development study grant, and those grants have actually given us a roadmap for the future to tie in our waterfront, this beautiful waterfront, to our Main Street. And I look at, and what makes me excited is I look at the vacant lot on our Main Street as a clean slate. We're starting fresh from this day forward, and we can set our own destiny as far as our downtown. And with all of that, I once again want to thank all the officials from the state of Vermont for their hard work in reaching this settlement. And I want to thank our economic development partners. And I know as mayor and speaking for the city manager, I do look forward to working with everyone for the future of Newport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Finally, let me ask Commissioner Pieciak to say a few words.
Thanks, TJ.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm Mike Pieciak. I'm the Commissioner at the Department of Financial Regulation, and our department was the entity that conducted the investigation here in Vermont. And I remember about 3.5 years ago going up to that hill as one of our first efforts in this investigation and checking out the ANC bio facility. And it's a pleasure to be back here 3.5 years later to participate in this announcement, which brings some great news to the region after so much bad news has been delivered over the past 3.5 years. But to not dwell on the bad news, but to think about some of the good news that has been delivered in the last 2 years in particular. We've been able to achieve through the work of the current administration and the investigation that we participated in over $200 million of settlements. Those dollars went to make sure that hundreds of people continued to meet the payroll, that hundreds of people at Jay Peak never missed a paycheck, that the lights stayed on at Jay Peak and at Burke. It ensured that dozens of Vermont contractors were paid for the work that they did and did not receive payment on, and that hundreds of trade creditors here in Vermont were paid in full. So those are great things that happened as a result of those settlements and the investigation, and certainly puts Jay Peak on a brighter future when an eventual sale happens, and the future does, as the governor said, look bright, not just for Newport, but for the Northeast Kingdom region. So I want to thank the Attorney General. I want to thank the people at our department, Gavin Boyles, who's here with us today, for their great work and efforts in leading to today's settlement. So thank you very much.